Good evening, and welcome to the last in our series of engaging with technology in a safe manner, a safe and effective manner. So I'm going to start by touching on something that we somewhat discussed last week, but I'd like to just follow up a little bit on that, which is the issue of maintaining your privacy. Okay. There are a lot of good reasons to do that. There's a lot of good reasons to maintain your privacy, both as a pragmatic thing and as a firm person who wants to engage in technology appropriately. We say every day morning, "Matayva Lafayakov," right? And what was the Mepharshim, what was he talking about? That all of the tents were set up so that you cannot look directly at one tent from the other directly. You have to get up and go to it, whatever, because you shouldn't really be poking your nose into someone else's private life, and you shouldn't be displaying your private life. Okay. And it is really somewhat incumbent on us to be a little bit discreet, a little bit bashaden. Hatzne leches doesn't only mean the length of your skirt, how high your collars are, etc. It's how you present yourself in person, but also how much of your life you display. And again, I'm not talking about necessarily keeping everything a deep, dark secret. There's a difference between discretion and high secrecy. But it is appropriate to not necessarily share everything about your life, much less about other people's lives, etc., in public. So that's, and again, this has the added effect that things that are problematic on all respects, even not just as a personal or a more higher level, are less likely to happen if you tend to think twice about what should I even be sharing these pictures, because the whole world doesn't have to see it. That winds up helping to avoid more serious things that are clearly halachically problematic, such as ophilus, etc. So, approaching this primarily as a firm person, keeping a certain level of discretion. Not everybody has to know all the details of every fancy party you made, or even that gorgeous, meal or table you spread or whatever, because again, it's a level of exposure that isn't necessary. It can create pressures on other people. And as a responsible person, that's not something that you should be that should be part of who you are and how you present yourself. The pragmatic issue is, again, that this kind of information can be used against you. And again, it's not even a matter of people say, oh, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to be ashamed of. It's not a matter of being ashamed, okay? So there are various issues. Sometimes it's just embarrassing. Sometimes it's embarrassing to someone else. You wind up, incidentally breaching someone else's privacy. Like if you're talking about, say, family issue, right? Those family issues often are not just your issues, right? Because there are other family members involved. And sometimes you wind up exposing things about other people that they are not interested in exposing, or it would be very much to their detriment to expose, or whatever it is. And that's a problem. That's a problem, again, both from a perspective, but also just as a pragmatic thing. But at the same time, you also sometimes expose more about yourself than you really want the whole world to be aware of. So that's something that you need to think about. Like maybe you expose you're having financial problems, or maybe you don't want the whole world to know that you're having these family problems. But if you talk too loosely in public spaces, that comes out. Another way that this stuff crops up, though, is, again, stuff like, you talk on Facebook in an unlocked, in an open channel that is open to everybody, about your upcoming vacation to Florida. And you've posted some pictures of your house that are quite, they look nice. They look like you may have something to, for somebody to break into. And yeah, you've just become low-hanging fruit. Your house has just become low-hanging fruit for a thief who now decides, hey, you know what? Hmm, you know, Sasha Dvash is going to be out of town. She says she and her husband are going, they're all going for a family vacation to the Magic Kingdom, the third week of August. We should check the place out. You know, if this is the thing we do, we might as well do it to people who are not around, not because we care about them, but because it makes it easier for us to do the thing we do, right? And again, depending on what information you may have posted, they may not even need to physically come to your house to check it out because they know about your backyard that you've talked about, and they know about, the jewelry that your husband got you last month, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they have, like they say, oh, you're traveling, let's look through your feed and see what you have. And that could be all the information they need. Maybe, with a quick Google and, looking at some of your other social media accounts, you may, without having ever thought about it, giving a thief all they need to rob your house, right? Or, say you have not the best passwords, or you've used, some of the standard, quote unquote secret questions. I had mentioned this last week, and somebody mentioned this, asked about this. You've used some of the standard secret question answers and used a real answer. And this information is in your feed, and it's maybe in your other social media. Or you can, or, you're in, you mentioned say you mentioned you're going to somebody just mentioned, the user groups for Disney. Disney has a number of user fan clubs, groups, et cetera, right? So now somebody knows that you mentioned the Magic Kingdom, right? They may not be interested in breaking into your house, but now, oh, you're going to the Magic Kingdom. So they're going to hop into they're going to quickly check the Disney user groups and see what information you've put there, and then use that information to hack your bank account, because your bank account has a password and you haven't set up two-factor authentication, but there is a secret question, but you use real life answers to your secret questions. So now they have all the information they need to hack your bank account. And the problem, again, there is that it can take a while before you find out what's going on. Unless you're the kind of person that literally checks your bank account every day, somebody can wipe you out before you know about it. And that, and again, with all of the protections and all of that, you can be out a lot of money and a lot of, resources. And beyond that, even if you get it back, even if you get 100% of your money back, you still need to deal with the identity theft. You still need to deal with the bank getting your money back, et cetera, et cetera. So best case in a case like this, where somebody uses your information to hack your account, et cetera, you're out a lot of time and a lot of aggravation. It is something that, so again, just on a pragmatic basis, keeping your privacy is really, it just, it's both a moral imperative and a practical imperative, because the last thing you need, the assumption behind these private questions is that nobody knows these things. But if you're sharing that information out in the public sphere, people know that information. And we don't even really think about it. Like, most people, I probably have not mentioned my mother's maiden name, but and I'm not even that big of a social media presence in my personal life. But there are probably, a few dozen places where my childhood address has come up, because, I chat with other people who knew me as a kid, and I may mention my childhood home in that context, right? Anybody who's just like following this stuff, may ignore it most of the time, unless they hear or see something that makes them think it's worth trying to hack my bank account, at which point now they're going to go back and look for all that stuff that was casually dropped. So there is a limit to how much you can, keep your information from getting out there. But if you do work on maintaining your privacy, you make it that much harder. And the harder you make it, the less likely, again, none of this stuff is 100%, but the less likely you are to be the person who gets victimized. So how do you protect the privacy beyond just being careful what you say? So a real important thing is being careful about what groups you join, right? So, don't join every WhatsApp group that somebody sends you a link to. Think about who's in that group and how much you want to engage with it, right? So there are groups that are bigger with more people, people you may not know. Those are groups that you should think twice about joining. And if you join it, and it's one of those groups that there can be back and forth, think twice about whether you want to, how much you want to share there, versus the group that's just your family that hopefully shares your concerns about not, just sharing all the information that comes your way. If you're on Facebook, my advice generally, if you're on Facebook, is act as though everything that you post on Facebook is open to everybody, and do not post anything that you don't want your boss to see, that you don't want your mother to see, that you don't want to be on the front page of the New York Times, and whatever the local community groups and newspapers are, because it's very easy for stuff to be hacked. If you do want to use it in a more, sharing personal information, etc., then make sure that you're very conscious of how you use Facebook. Preferably don't put it on your phone, because again, that leads you often to use Facebook in a less considered fashion. And have separate layers of who you share with. So you have your group that's just family and a few close friends that you can post more on, a group that's friends that you know fairly well, so you can be a little more open, and then your regular friends group, or any groups that you're on. You need to be very careful how you share, and this is true for every social media platform. Facebook is the biggest, but the same concept applies everywhere. And that's really the bottom line in how to maintain some semblance of privacy. And yes, you hear, oh, privacy is gone, forget about it. And to some extent, there is a reality to that, but it is not sensible to just therefore throw up your hands and just let everything out. Because at the end of the day, first of all, not everything is out there, and the more difficult you make it, again, the less likely you are to run into trouble. Now, if the FBI is after you, or some spy agency or something like that, this is probably not going to help. But I'm not really, after that. I'm after the people who will, spend an hour or two trying to get enough information to empty your bank account, or get enough information to break into your house, or to steal your identity, not to empty your bank account, but to open 3 credit cards that they can rack up huge bills on, and then you're stuck with it. Okay. Or maybe get information that you really have kept private, that you have a good reason to not want to share, and then, try to use that to either make you pay out in cash, or, pressure you to say, provide, access to your company's, networks or something like that. And I know that sounds like, something out of a cheap thriller, but the reality is that many of the biggest hacks of large companies, where again, of large companies, have come from insiders who were either paid or pressured to allow access or to provide information that outsiders shouldn't have. And you may not care about this big company, but the problem is that it comes back to you. Like, for it, just as an example, the Target hack. Now, that was not that happened before, but Target got hacked a few years ago, and guess what? Thousands of people got credit card charges that were fraudulent, and it took people a long time to get those charges. And, some of those charges were large. We're not talking about $10, $15. People who couldn't afford it were getting hundreds and even $1,000 worth of charges on their credit card. And you know what I'm saying? So when I talk about like being pressured to give access to your company's you know, that's a really big problem. I mean, obviously, beyond the fact that you could lose your job if you're the person who does that, this is a real, it's a real, again, it's a practical and it is a moral problem. You have a responsibility to not open other people to this kind of thing. Again, I realize that if the FBI or the criminal equivalent of that is after you, you're exposed. But that's not. But there are a lot of very, very bad people who aren't that level of skillful, but they will absolutely spend a couple of hours going after your information to try to twist your arm. So this is really, really important. It's a big deal. So it's not just your privacy for the sake of your privacy, but also for the sake of your safety. So that was something I wanted to pick up from last week. The other thing that I really want to talk about today is misinformation and disinformation. And sometimes you see the words used interchangeably. Some people very much differentiate between the two. But fundamentally, from the end user point of view, misinformation and disinformation are very closely, very similar. And your ways of protecting yourself from both of them are pretty much the same. So what are they? Misinformation and disinformation both are incorrect information. Typically, when you differentiate, you say misinformation is something that is being spread in good faith. It's incorrect, but it's being spread in good faith. Disinformation is information that's incorrect, but it's spread with knowing that it's false for an ulterior motive. So I'll give you an example of something that could be either, right? Say you get a video about the evils of apples. And if you eat an unpeeled apple, you will be ingesting the worst kind of poison. And the only way to safely eat an apple is to wash it with this special solution and then peel it 3 times. Okay. Now, if you get this video from your aunt, who you happen to know is scared of her skin and just, is always worried about, pesticides and all this other stuff, that's misinformation. Somebody told her, somebody sent her this thing. She believes it. She's afraid you're going to give this to your kid and poison your darling children. And, yeah. Now, if this is being sent out by the people who sell this special solution, then it's probably disinformation. This is somebody who's sending out this video to scare people into buying their special solution, which is probably, about the strength of, caramel water, if you're lucky. Or it may actually be something that has this horrible taste and has some dangerous chemicals in it. Who knows? Because I wouldn't trust anybody who would do that, right? But the point is that when it's just somebody who's sharing this because they heard this thing and they're horrified or they're excited or whatever, that's misinformation. They're misinformed. They're making a mistake, but they're acting in good faith. Disinformation is information that is intended, that has an ulterior motive. It's intended to get you to buy something, to do something, to not do something, to believe something that will then open you up to other things, right? So maybe the person who sent out this video about apples isn't trying to get you to buy this very special solution. They're not selling that solution. But what they're trying to do is get you riled up at big agriculture so that when you send out an email with a call to action that you should write to your senators about how horrible, terrible, very bad all the fruit growers in the United States are and how the government should, take over all the orchards or something, that you will do it. Okay, I'm making up something, that's a little bit, over the top, but that is the way many of these things happen. And this is a real thing. This stuff happens. Sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller. I mentioned in a prior session a story that I saw printed in a magazine that should have known better about this, about somebody who was like all upset, about the dangers of the internet. And the real problem was that somebody posted a story that was flamingly not true, that was clearly completely not true. And this person, instead of thinking about this and thinking about what he knew, just accepted the story as truth. At least he called up somebody who could clarify. But the truth is, he knew that it wasn't true, and he would have realized this if he had just thought about it. And that's really what's important here. That we need to think about, and that's how you protect yourself against both mis and disinformation. And I'll get to, some specifics in a moment. But again, this happens on a small scale. This is an example of a small scale. Big scale, for those of you who have been paying attention over the last 6 years or so, the phrase Cambridge Analytica, okay? This is an example of a company that basically misused people's information to target ads that they knew, okay? Cambridge Analytica was selling this information that they had no legitimate reason to have, by the way, to companies that were deliberately targeting misinformation or disinformation in this case, because it was information that they knew that was either incorrect or misleading to people who they thought would believe it. Okay. Now, the reason why Cambridge Analytica is a problem is not because it was this political party or that political party. I don't care what political party you are. But as a consumer of political news, you have a right to know that what you're being told is at minimum factually correct, right? So when somebody sends you stuff that is factually incorrect for whatever reason, that's a problem. That's a problem, especially if you're going to base a decision on it, whether it's who you vote, what kind of food you buy, where you invest your money, what kind of clothes you wear, it doesn't matter. If you're making decisions and you're taking actions based on incorrect information, that can be a problem. I'll take another example of something this is totally misinformation. Everybody I know who has spread this particular piece of misinformation is doing this with the best motives in the world. They want to help people. However, this piece is a little bit problematic. Recently, I got this piece about if you're having chest pains and these symptoms, this is what you should do. And the problem with that is twofold. The first problem is nowhere on that list does it say call 911, which is absolutely the first thing you should ever do. If you have any symptoms that sound like it could be a stroke or could be a heart attack or anything like that, the first thing you should do is call 911 and give them your address. Second thing is, if you're alone, is call somebody who can get into your house and tell them that you just called 911 and, ask them to get home, okay, or get into the house or whatever. After that, you can try some of those things because sometimes they'll work for a few minutes and sometimes they won't work at all. And therefore, it is important, and if they don't work, or if they only work for a few minutes, if somebody's having a heart attack, which is one of the things you're talking about, if you haven't called 911 before you start trying this stuff, by the time you realize it's not working, it may be too late. Okay. Again, I'm using this as an example of why misinformation can be a problem. Again, the people who are sending this stuff out have the best intentions in the world. But the information is dangerous because of the lack of correct information in there that could keep people from doing the thing that can save them the most. So this is really, really important. It's very important to always vet your information, okay? And, it's not that easy to do. I totally get that. But so the first thing is to look at, does the person who is sending me this information have a vested interest? Okay, sometimes they don't. Like I said, most of the people who send out this particular thing don't have a vested interest. Second question, is it possible that somebody at the beginning of the chain had a vested interest? Okay. The minute the answer to either of those questions is yes, you need to be like ultra careful. But even if you can't think of somebody who might have a vested interest here, right? And in this case, I don't think there is. You need to step back and think about a few things, okay? One is, what do I know with fierce certainty, and how does that match what this thing is saying, okay? And sometimes that by itself, and this is, I had spoken much earlier on in the series about the need to teach critical thinking. And this is an example of where the ability to step back and say, just because the person who sent it to me is a person who I respect or is a person of authority, whatever. My teacher, who I have a great deal of respect for, right, sent me this particular piece. I would be respectful of her as a person, but she's not an expert on medical emergencies. So I am not going to treat what she sends me about medical emergencies with any more credence than I will treat it from, say, my sister, who I also have a lot of respect for. But again, she's not a medical expert. My teacher's not a medical expert. Therefore, I will not give it credence as somebody, has a medical expert. And the fact that it says in the post, Dr. Such and so, who is the medical, the head of the medical department at Hospital X, just because the post says that doesn't mean it's true. Now, this is the first thing you need to step back is, don't assume authority just because it says that this is important or this expert said this, et cetera, et cetera. So step back and kind of wipe that away. So you've done the first step, you've done the second step. If there is an possible ulterior motive, you're going to be extra cautious and do some checking. If this does not specifically match something you already know, you're going to do some checking. How do you do some checking? That's the tricky piece. Okay. And this is where I recommend a few things. So number one is, the minute you see where it says Dr. Such and so, who is the whatever of this hospital, that's actually really easy. When there's a name and an institution, it's really very easy, because that's when you can check. I remember a few years ago, there was this thing going around about lead in lipstick. And to listen to this, it would happen to be, this was pre-social media. This is on email. So this is a problem that is not new. And this email going around about the horrors of the terrible amounts of lead in lipstick. Now, lead is toxic, no doubt about it. But the whole thing about, and I was just kind of a little skeptical. Now, I mean, I don't care. I'm not tied to any particular lipstick brand. I don't care. But it was causing a bit of a furor. Somebody had sent it around at work, and I'm like, okay, I don't have the patience for this. So the first thing I did was, I noticed that they had mentioned that some doctor from Johns Hopkins University had made this whole thing. So I jumped into the Johns Hopkins University Hospital site and checked. And guess what? It's on their site in there, like they have well, it was then, I don't know about now. At the time, they had a section for like frequently asked questions, et cetera, like things like that. And they had a thing about it where they're saying, we are aware that there is this email going around and we know nothing about it. Okay. So the minute you find something like that, you know that that whoever sent it, somebody was certainly not telling the truth, because it has the name of an institution that is saying, no, we do not know anything about it. So the minute you see that, you can totally discount it. That's the easy one. What happens if you don't have something that simple? So it's really important to find a few sites and a stable, so to speak, of resources that you can check. So for halacha, for instance, I have certain people who somebody posts something about halachic stuff, and I've seen some stuff that is hair-raising, truly not halachic. And if you follow this advice, sometimes just, okay, it's too machmir. Okay, that's not the worst thing that you can do, right? But sometimes this is stuff that actually is halachically problematic. Okay, you think you're doing a good thing, and it's really problematic, right? So I know I have, the people who I can ask. I have the rabbanim I can ask. You should have every person should have at least one number of a person they can ask and of a rav they can ask. Same thing for legal advice. If this is something that looks like it applies to you, you should have at least one person, one website, and one lawyer that you can call to ask if before moving forward with a legal, same for medical, etc. There are also some really good general websites. For instance, one that I use a lot is called Snopes, Snopes.com. Another is called Truth or Fiction. These are really, really good sites. And if you want to know, is this a good site? What's really important is, do they show their sources? A site that says, we researched it and it doesn't, whatever. That's not a good site, okay? I happen to like, PolitiFact for political stuff. I don't usually care enough to look it up, but when I do, again, why do I like it? A, because I know they do have a little bit of a political slant, which I don't like, but by and large, they will go where the facts lead them, even if it's about somebody who they generally don't like. And how do I know this? A, because I've seen some of the stuff they posted about people they don't like, but B, they show, well, like when we were in school, your teacher always said, show your work. They show their work. They tell you, who did they talk to? Where did they look? What sources did they use? Okay. And that's important because, what's important is not their conclusion, but you can look at all of their sources and draw your own conclusions if you want. And that's what's really important about any source that you use. Do they show their sources? Snopes will tell you, give you a list of links. Truth or Fiction will give you a list of links, etc. This is important because, sometimes you can ask a person you trust, fine, but sometimes you don't have that availability. That person isn't available. This is a subject that you don't happen to have somebody. And being able to go ahead and go to a site like that and go work through, not in great detail, but work through why they say, yes, this is true, this is not true, this is half true, this is, the history of this particular claim, can be really, really useful in helping you figure out what your next step there is. And again, all of the good sites not only tell you where they look, they give you the links. Okay. And that is the last thing I want to point out here. If you get something and there are a bunch of links or studies cited, etc., right? That tends to make this look very, very, makes it look real. It gives it gravitas. It makes it look, serious, okay? But, it's very easy to cite studies that don't exist. I mean, I'm not even talking about studies that are fraudulent, etc. I'm talking about studies that don't exist. And I just saw it's just interesting how, the world turns. Somebody just linked me to an article that I found very interesting. Somebody had posted a supposed letter to the editor that created on their site that created some back and forth. And then a week later, the owner of the site said, okay, now I have a confession to make. That original letter was not written by a reader of the site. It was a fake letter made up by an AI bot, and it goes into some of the technical details, which isn't really relevant. So, that's, first raised, eyebrow raiser. But what was really interesting is that in discussing how they set up, the people of the site actually set this up. They were conducting an experiment, which the ethics of that is another whole discussion that I'm not going to get into. But it was just really, really interesting. But one of the really interesting things that they mention is that in looking at some of the versions that the AI had given them and the responses that the AI had given them, the AI just spouted out links and studies and tweets, by the way, that don't exist. So it looks like this is a genuine, real thing that, is really, must be real. We have all these studies, we have all these links. And all of this was made up by the chat. It was what's called a chat bot, because it and it really, yeah. I mean, it's frightening how good it was. That these studies looked real. The tweet was the kind of thing that the person who they claimed made this tweet could have said, but they actually never did. So it's really, really important if this is something that that you're going to take on board. If there are any studies referenced, if there are any links, if there are any institutions, that in some ways makes it easier to figure out what's happening, because check the links. Now, by the way, don't just click on the link willy-nilly, because if this is somebody who's a bad actor who is actually trying to snooker you into something, that link could take you to a very bad place. So you need to find a way to see what that link is without necessarily clicking on it. But you can search for the name of the study. You can search for the link rather than clicking on it, etc. And these are ways you can find out. Like, for instance, you copy the link and paste it. You go to Google and paste it into the Google search bar, and it will tell you where this is going to go, or will tell you that this doesn't exist, right? But that will help you find out whether this thing is real. So that's really the most important thing here, is not whether something is misinformation or disinformation, but is it truth? Is it accurate? Is it factual? And if it is not, these are ways you can figure out whether or not this is it is or it is not. And then you can decide what to do about it. But again, it's important because even when people send you stuff in good faith, they may be giving you very bad advice, right? I mean, if somebody, say, had tried to convince you to, just take a current example. I know people who are like, oh, invest in Bitcoin and sending me articles about Bitcoin. I'm like, oh, no. Do not. And what I told everybody is, don't invest money you can't afford to lose. Well, yeah, it turns out that Bitcoin soared, and now it's lost about 2/3. It's 2/3 below what it was at its peak. So if you bought Bitcoin, a year and a half ago, you're okay. If you bought Bitcoin 9 months ago, you've probably lost your shirt, right? So again, the people who said this to me were not people who were trying to get me. They were hoping to help me. They were trying to figure out how to do this. They were asking my advice. They were trying to encourage me. And to all of these people, I said, no, don't do this. Okay. Because I didn't have to do this kind of research, because it's something I've been following for a long time, this particular subject. But fundamentally, the point is that there's a lot of information floating out there that people will share with you in good faith. And it doesn't matter that it's good faith. It matters that it's bad information that could lead you to make some mistakes. Okay. So, it's very, very important whenever you get some information to, again, be willing to think critically and say, okay, what do I know that matches or doesn't match this? Unless I actively know something that makes me say, this is probably true, I need to check this out. And these are ways. Talk to somebody who you can ask the question. Look at one of the sites that you've already checked out on this subject that is has good information, or go to one of the more general sites that has good information, so that you can figure out whether this is worthwhile or not worthwhile. Okay, I just want to reiterate something about the privacy thing. So two things. First of all, you have to really be very, very careful what you put where. And just because information is being asked of you doesn't mean you have to share it. But also, sometimes you make a mistake. Somebody posted here on the chat, oh yes, I see, it's to everyone on the Zoom, that her 89-year-old mother put her license on a group by accident. So I would say 90% of the people on that group are fine, but all you need is one person. And the kind of people I'm talking about are the kinds of people who, by the way, and the overlap here is very simple. The same people who will use your license number who will troll these groups are the kinds of people who will send you an email with a phony URL to get you to put in your license number, your password to your Google account, your password, your PIN to your house, to your phone, or to the lock of your front door, et cetera, et cetera. They'll have this, very plausible sounding story, take you to a site, etc. So, the disinformation people, now not the misinformation people, but the disinformation people and the people who will use your private information against you are a very, very heavily overlapping group. And one group, and to the extent that there's not, the people on the outside of one group will sell the information to the other to use against you in a heartbeat. So protect your privacy, protect other people's privacy, and really be very, very careful before you swallow information that gets sent to you, even by people who mean well. So if anybody has any questions, you can post it here in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask. No questions here. Okay, I just posted in the YouTube screen. Okay, so I take it that there are no questions, or at least no questions that anybody wants to. Okay, so I have stopped the recording. If there's somebody who wants to ask a question that they don't want recorded, feel free to ask. Okay, so I hope that this has been helpful. And sorry,
Victoria, some lately. Me?
Just one?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. A lot of times I get like a text message that says hi, and it sounds like it's somebody who's a friend. And then, you know, if you answer them, then they try to engage you in a conversation. And I normally just mute them. I just delete them. But I'm wondering, like, what are they after?
It depends. They could be after just to get personal information that they then use in some way or fashion.
Information.
They may be trying to feel you out and see if they can hook you into going to an inappropriate site, and then they will use that as quote unquote proof and try to blackmail you that way. They may try to hook you into clicking on a link that will then cause your information to be siphoned off. So like if they what was I going to say? So they can get you, cause you to go to a link that then asks for your Google credentials, right? And then, there's something called the man in the middle attack, where they're because you're hooking up to that link, you will type in your Google credentials, but they're monitoring everything you're doing, and therefore now they have your account name and password, just as an example. So what specifically they're asking for, I can't say for sure, but there is a really good chance that they're either looking for information or trying to get you to click on a link. The other thing that they may be trying to do is, if you have two-factor authentication and you are using text-based authentication, they may be trying to keep you engaged long enough to then ask you, oh, you should have just gotten, I'm sending you this, this key. Please tell me back what I just sent you. And it's not that they sent you the key. They're causing the two-factor authentication to send a key that they can't see and that they want from you, so that they can use your texting essentially as a second factor to hack into an account that you're using two-factor authentication for. So again, there are a bunch of different possibilities, but your best bet is to delete it. Now, if you have, I will add one thing here. If you are using a Google Pixel phone, or you have one of the text spam blocking services, Verizon and AT&T, and I believe T-Mobile all have these services, you can report that number as spam, which will keep that number, that particular number, from coming through to you, but also in the short term, it's not likely to do that much, because these numbers get used, like these spammers get like literally hundreds of numbers. They use them one after another, but it starts creating a pattern that hopefully these companies can sometimes use to figure out who is doing stuff like this, to go after them. So if you have that service, or you're using the Google Pixel phone, set up the spam blocking, and it will let you literally with the click of one or two clicks report a incoming text or a number as spam, and they kind of use it in their machine learning to help them better identify stuff that should not be coming in.
Yeah, those are good. And I use that for telephone blocking. But for text blocking, they don't usually support that. There is a good program, by the way, called Hiya, Hiya, that I do use, and that also is really good for blocking phone calls.
Yes.
And there's one other trick that I'm finding a few times. They send you a link it looks like it's a real honest to goodness link. It'll have like a Netflix domain or something, and it says, "Oh, your card was expired. Click here and update it." And I'm sure, if you went there and you updated your card, then they have your information.
Yep. Oh, yes. Yes. Couple of rules of thumb. Number one is check, hover over the domain, because, like, for instance, Netflix uses a very specific circumscribed set of domains. Same for Amazon. If it says your Amazon, my Amazon, that's not Amazon. Amazon dot anything but Amazon.com, unless you're, well, with some exceptions, such as if you are in the UK, there will be Amazon.uk. But if you're not in the UK and you get an Amazon.uk, this is all garbage. Be very, very, very careful. A second rule of thumb is that decent companies never send you an email and expect you to click on a link unless it is part of an already existing back and forth, such as when you place an order on Amazon and you get a confirmation email with a tracking number. That's one thing. You will not, out of the blue, get an email from Amazon saying, the credit card we have on file for you has expired. Please click on this link. Okay. If you have any reason, I actually stopped doing business with one company who pulled something like that. Because it was just like, and I emailed them. I said, I will never do business with you guys again, because what you just did was the most insane security hygiene that I've ever dealt with. And by the way, that company has since gone out of business, and I believe that some of these shenanigans was part of what, because I wasn't the only one who was very, very ticked off. But the other thing is, if you have any reason to believe that this may possibly be true, still don't click on the link. Go to that company's website, or assuming you have an account with them. If you don't have an account with them, then just ignore it. It's for sure. There's no reason to believe it. Your card didn't suddenly expire with a company that you don't have an account with. So don't even worry about that. But say it looks like it came from your bank, and it really, really, really looks like it came from your bank, which can happen for a whole host of reasons. Do not click on that link. Go to your bank site, find the number for whatever accounts you have, and then call, not from the email, call that number and say, hey, this is my account. I got this email. What's the deal? And follow it from there. Whether it's your bank, whether it's Netflix, it doesn't matter. Do not click on a link from an unexpected email. And by the way, again, all of the good companies are very well aware of it. The best ones, their phone people are trained, but even the ones that aren't trained, they'll finally figure out who to transfer you to. And yes, it's a few minutes extra and it can be a little bit aggravating, but the aggravation is well worth it 16 times for the one time, or, even it's not 16 times, by the way. 9 times out of 10, it's a fraud. And the aggravation you have in the phone call is you will be so happy you did it when you discover that this was somebody trying to, get your credit card information, your password to something, etc. And it happens all the time. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, in that case, a good night to all. If anybody wants any other sessions, let me know. But for the moment, this is the end of the series. I will make sure most of them have already been posted on YouTube on one playlist, so you can, do one at any given one as you want. I will make sure that the playlist system is completed, and I will have titles that will give you a little bit of an indication of which is what. So anybody who wants can always go back and see. And as I said, I did very little on specific products. So, most of what I have discussed, unfortunately, is going to be valid in a year and 2 years from now as well. But right, even for the next few weeks, if you want to go back and look at that, I would, it's all there. And if you go to YouTube, just Google my name, put in my name, Keza Zajac, and you'll find it. And with that.